has two daughters, so I'm sure this hits home for him. And I wanted to get his take on this, and it's a pleasure to have him on. Pete, thank you so much for being here again. Good to have you. How are you, sir?
Brian, great to be back. I really appreciate you having me on your show. I've really enjoyed watching and listening to it. And yeah, it's terrible. I just saw this tweet. Breaking news. Well-regulated militia opens fire in Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin. Cheap thoughts and useless prayers are now being rushed to the scene. More on this soon-to-be-forgotten and then repeated story as it develops.
So true. So true, Pete. And I try not to go on X as much as I used to because it's just a cesspool, as you know, of bigotry and hatred. But I see some of these people on the right saying, oh, I bet it was a trans shooter. And it's just despicable comments. And there are parents, unfortunately, there are going to be some kids that aren't going to be going home today. And instead of talking about, hey, we need to do something to fix this problem, attacking the trans community and saying, oh, Democrats are going to make this political.
There can be any number of reasons why any of us get really upset, very emotional, become, in some extreme cases, homicidal or suicidal. It happens all over the country all the time. But most people don't necessarily have access to a gun right now. If you want to, you can. But the question isn't to talk about mental health or why they did this. We can get to that, and we should. We always will. I mean, if we had some kind of motive right now, as we quickly got with Luigi Mangione, we pretty much understand why he did what he did. He wrote a goddamn manifesto. But no, the issue is access to guns. That's the issue. So if you want to score political points and say this person had these beliefs and was radicalized by this guy or that philosophy, fine. But it's the access to guns. So if they're a far left-wing radical or a far right-wing white supremacist, it's all one common thread. It's only in America, only in America. It's the access to guns and the bullets. And I've been working on this issue for years with every single major local organization, all the way from the top to the bottom, on the issue of gun violence. It's a huge issue, and these stories get so much attention. And the last point I would make is right now on TV, as we're talking, it happened just, I don't know, a couple of hours ago. But like MSNBC is now on their third law enforcement expert that they invited on to speculate about another nightmare school shooting. But none of the experts have any inside information, Brian. I mean, there's an argument that this type of coverage is part of the problem. It perpetuates this kind of violence. And, you know, no matter what happens, it's like you bring on an expert, a plane crashes. I used to do this joke in my stand-up act, and then they just bring some guy on who doesn't know any more than you or I. It's like, what? Do we know why it crashed? No, I don't know. But I can tell you that this plane was the kind with wings and 2 jet engines, and I've flown this before, and it's, you know, usually it handles pretty well. I'm not quite sure what happened. Yeah, nobody knows what happened. Get off the air. Update us when you do.
Right. You know, you're right. It's all speculation, right? I just was listening to Andrew McCabe. Nice guy, right? But he doesn't know why this happened or who the shooter is or motive or anything.
It's always the law enforcement people, because it's, well, why are we inviting all the law enforcement people? Invite the anti-gun violence people on right away. Invite Moms Demand on right away. Invite Chris Brown at Brady. Invite Shannon Watts at Demand. Invite David Hogg. Invite all of these young activists to come on and talk about gun violence. It's the gun violence. Kid didn't walk in with a knife. It's a gun. It doesn't happen in other countries because they don't have access to guns. And these stupid solutions, like you mentioned earlier, Ted Cruz. How dumb do you have to be? First of all, the shooter, as Dave Chappelle famously or infamously told in the stand-up bit, he's in the shooting drills. He's, in this case, a student at the school. He knows what protections they're taking. So you can armor your school all you want. You know what I would do, Brian? I would wait in the parking lot with my assault rifle. So what are you going to do then? Put a dome over the parking lot and a security gate to get in there? It's preposterous, these notions. It's access to guns, period.
You are so right. And I'm a personal friend. Fred Gutenberg is such a great guy. And, you know, I have him on this show all the time. And sadly, usually it's after a school shooting. He lost his daughter in Parkland. You're so right about that. You know, you want to hear from those kinds of people because they know what it's like, sadly, to lose somebody in a school shooting, to lose your child. And yet, when you hear, you know, the Greg Abbotts of the world and others after a mass shooting like this one, I think it was after the Walmart shooting in Texas, El Paso, he said, well, now's not the time to talk about gun control. Let's not talk about gun control right now. Why is it, Pete, that when you hear these Republicans that are running for office, in almost all of their campaign commercials, they're bragging about their A+ rating from the NRA. But yet I've never seen or heard of a Democrat bragging about their A+ rating from the NRA. It's always the Republicans that are bragging about their NRA rating. It appears to me that what they care about is remaining in power, getting the money from the NRA, and they put that and prioritize that ahead of our public safety.
Well, I understand this issue all too intimately. I've been covering it for years. I've talked to all sides of it. I've moderated debates on it and so on. And I mean, there's a lot of ways to talk about it. First of all, I think that it's not necessarily because of the NRA money anymore. As a matter of fact, the NRA is bankrupt and like on its way out. There are plenty of other organizations, but the movement itself is very powerful. The pro-gun movement. I don't have to tell you or anybody listening how powerful this movement is. So Republicans really have to be beholden to the ideology of anybody can have guns all the time, as much as you want, unregulated gun industry, gun buying. They have to be beholden to that far end of the spectrum or they'll get primaried. So it's less about the money, and the money comes in from individual donors when you hold that kind of view and send out your Christmas card with you and your family members holding AR-15s. I mean, these people, including you mentioned Governor Abbott, he is a particularly vile, insidious creature on this issue. He once tweeted, Brian, go look it up. Everybody should. He put out a tweet years ago that basically shamed Texan residents for who did not buy guns. He said, you should, something about the effect of you should be embarrassed if you're not a gun owner. And the most important part of this issue is the lie that's been told to a generation of Americans now, which is that the Second Amendment has always said that you have a right to a personal firearm. I've been covering this issue with constitutional law scholars for over a decade. That's not what the Second Amendment said, and it's not what the Supreme Court held forever until the 80s, until the rise of the NRA, and it did become a huge lobbying effort because obviously they got to make more and more guns. But let's be clear, this was not the interpretation of the Second Amendment for the vast majority of American history. And, you know, don't ask me, ask the right-wing former chairman of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, who said it's absurd to think that that's the interpretation of it. And I could find you that quote. But I mean, this is something that's been hijacked, this entire movement, this interpretation of the Second Amendment. It's not what it says. I most infamously got in a huge argument with Joe Rogan on his show about this. And I could just tell you, you know, it's obviously one of the biggest shows in the world. That was November 19. It was pretty big then. And I heard from listeners for months, still do every once in a while, that are telling me to kill myself because of my correct view of the history on guns, much less my personal opinion. So it's obviously a really powerful, animating issue, and will continue to be no matter how many kids get killed and no matter what the name of the school is. And it does.
Yeah, you're right. If you're just joining us, he is Pete Dominick, CNN contributor. Wanted to talk about some other issues with you, and we'll get to that. But let's talk about solutions, Pete, to gun control. You know, I talk about these issues all the time. Sadly, it's usually after another mass shooting. I've said I believe the age should be 18 to 21. I believe that we should have mandatory training. Just like you need to be trained to drive a car, you should be trained on how to use a weapon and store it properly, so on and so forth. I also believe that there should be the assault weapons ban that fizzled out in the early 90s. Republicans allowed it to fizzle out. I also think that that should be implemented. Red flag laws that work, that need to be consistent state to state. I've always believed in that as well. And I also believe that if you sell a gun illegally to somebody, it should be a mandatory prison sentence. Now, I don't expect all those things to be done. Give me a couple. Give me 2 out of those 5. And if the argument is, well, why would you raise the age 18 to 21 when you could be 18 and serve in the military? Yeah, but they're trained how to use the weapons. If you're in the military, they train you. An 18-year-old today, for the most part, just like the Uvalde, Texas shooting, the day he turns 18 could walk right into a gun store with 0 training. And, you know, 80% of the country believe in comprehensive background checks. Why can't we get this on the books? I mean, just give me 2 out of those, and I believe it'll save lives, Pete.
Yeah, you mentioned just a couple of reforms that would certainly be effective, but if you go to bradyunited.org, they have a whole bunch of others, including many that you didn't mention. When we think about these shootings, we sensationalize them because obviously when it's more than a few people, God, it's horrible at a grocery store or in a place of sanctuary, a synagogue or a church. But man, if it's kids in a school, there's nothing worse than that, obviously. But the bottom line is most gun violence that takes lives is homicide and suicide. That's by far the most, and even accidental death. And so one of the major reforms that could be instituted is locks, putting smart locks, which are highly available and effective on your guns. So God forbid your teenage kid doesn't find your gun and more than likely take their own life than take the lives of their friends, their siblings by accident, or kids in school. So there's so many more ideas and laws that we could change. You mentioned a few, but smart locks, why can't we do that? Inspire parents to lock up their guns at home. 4.6 million children live in homes with an unsecured firearm, Brian. I mean, if you're a gun-owning parent, you have to take responsibility for your gun.
What you're talking about, Sandy Hook. Unfortunately, the mother, it cost her life, but she had a mentally deranged son, and somehow he couldn't even interact with other people. He was, had so many issues, and yet she taught him how to use a gun and gave him access to guns. It cost her own life and all those innocent children in Sandy Hook. So many other things, Pete, to talk about. Obviously, this is breaking news. We're going to learn a little bit more information, I would hope, in the coming hours and days, weeks and months of how and why this happened. But I wanted to get your take on this because over the weekend, I'm seeing images of Daniel Penny, who was invited by Donald Trump to the Army-Navy football game. And I say to myself, and I posted this on social media today, Pete, why is it that the Republican Party, if you're the McCloskeys, a white couple, pointing your weapons at Black Lives Matter protesters, even though they're not on your private property, you become a star within the Republican Party. You speak at the RNC convention. Why is it that a guy like a Kyle Rittenhouse becomes a hero? He's paid by Turning Point to make speeches at some college universities. When Kyle Rittenhouse, fine, he wasn't convicted, but he's still a moron. He should have never been there to begin with in Kenosha. And now Daniel Penny, somehow, whether he's guilty or not guilty, I know he was found not guilty. If you put a black man in a chokehold and keep him in a chokehold after he's unconscious, somehow you're a hero. And I asked this question because Jordan Williams killed a black man. He's black. He killed a black man in New York City. It was self-defense. Why isn't Donald Trump inviting him to football games? I just feel like the answer is pretty simple. And I feel like in this country, at times, if you're white and you do something to somebody black, the Republican National Convention will have you speak at their convention and you're some sort of hero, Pete.
Yeah. Well, it's been the case for years now. I mean, you can go back to George Zimmerman, who murdered Trayvon Martin, who was minding his own business, walking home. And you can talk about Michael Brown in Ferguson, who was killed by a police officer. And whether or not it was, quote, some kind of vigilante justice or not, it's just too often that when white people kill black people, that it looks exactly like that. And people cheer it on and they celebrate it. And that is the order of things and the way that it should be. I mean, there's just no doubt about the racial, not undertones, but overtones of all of these different examples. But even if you wanted to, agree with the jury in the case of what happened to Jordan Neely with this guy, Daniel Penny, even if you wanted to agree with that, you don't celebrate it. You don't act like he's a hero. You don't put him up on a pedestal like that. He murdered somebody. And that's the case with many of these issues. And they elevate them and they put them. And I think more than anything, that's the sad part of this is because there are a certain frighteningly large percentage of Americans who can see people like this and want to revere them and want to respect them. And, this Kyle Rittenhouse, that kid is the saddest sack of an American story I've ever seen. He's always been. And it's just a pathetic situation. And they blew him all the way up. And then in many cases, he's deflated. I mean, what a sad life to be known for that your entire life. It's a terrible illustration of who we are. But let's be clear, it is who we are in terms of a large percentage of people who see that. But make no mistake, black folks and others see this for exactly what it seems to be.
No question about it. And I'm going to continue to point this out. I don't believe Daniel Penny is a hero. I don't believe Kyle Rittenhouse is a hero. I think he's an idiot. And the McCloskeys should have been convicted of crimes as well.
I have a chip on my shoulder about this too, because I did a heroic thing. Right?
Yeah.
I on a plane once, a guy went crazy, and I and other passengers restrained him. And the news press never got a hold of it. And I got no credit for it at all. I saved a plane from a mentally ill man who was becoming violent against people. I took my belt off and I tied his ankles in a chair. The guy ripped my shirt off. I was like John McClane in Die Hard. And not one news camera, nothing. That's why on shows like yours, I like to just put it out there. What about me? Where's my trophy? You know what they sent me? The airline, after the fact, sent me, a bald man, a hair care travel kit. Oh, thanks. Thank you.
I wouldn't have much. I wouldn't have much use for that either, Pete.
No racial undertones. There was just a big man. I and others took him down. Nothing. Yippee-ki-yay.
Yippee-ki-yay. I was just watching Die Hard yesterday. Right. Shoot the Glass. One of my favorite movies of all time.
Credit, not even from you. Even after telling you that, you just move on to a movie. You don't say, wow, you are heroic, and there should be a statue of you built on that airline's gate.
Pete, I put Scott Jennings as my number one hero. You're number two. Is that okay?
That's fine. I'll take it.
All right, fair enough. All right. So I had to bring this up because ABC paid off Donald Trump a whopping $15 million because George Stephanopoulos called Donald Trump a rapist, which I find very interesting because, Pete, I want to get your thoughts on this. Donald Trump is found liable of sexual abuse. The judge in the case characterized it as a rape. Now, I'm just going by what the judge said. Are you surprised that ABC decided to pay off this settlement of $15 million?
Yeah. I don't understand why they did this. I mean, they paid $15 million to Trump for saying exactly what the judge in the E. Jean Carroll case said. It's a stunning capitulation. I'm surprised that George Stephanopoulos went along with it. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised to see him resign, but I guess he needs to get his $20 million a year keep coming or whatever he gets there. But yeah, ABC really screwed up. They caved on this. I can't imagine why they did it. ABC was never going to lose this defamation lawsuit to Trump. They agreed to pay $15 million probably because it's good for business. So, I mean, I would say that we just have to make sure that we don't let the oligarchs continue to gaslight us. This is fascist. It's fascism. And we're seeing it unfold right before us. And anybody who capitulates or pays him off or pays his demands, I must be missing something. But Mark Elias, who is one of the heroic lawyers, even more heroic than what I did on that airplane that day, right? He said, knee bent, ring kissed. Another legacy news outlet chooses obedience. A reminder that this is what we're doing. This is where we're at. You can't obey. You have to be unapologetically pro-democracy until your microphone and your camera turns off. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Give in, cave in? I see these people capitulating left and right, and it's sad, but it further stiffens my spine. I'll tell you that.
It's incredible, Pete, because after Donald Trump was found liable for sexual abuse in the E. Jean Carroll case, if you remember, he did that CNN town hall with Caitlin Collins. God bless her. That was a difficult one to watch. Yeah. And he defamed E. Jean Carroll, and he was sued for defamation after he was already found liable. And when you have a judge, now listen, we can get into the weeds on what exactly sexual abuse is. It is my personal opinion that if any type of sexual abuse is rape, that's my personal opinion of it. And when the judge characterizes it as rape, I don't think George Stephanopoulos said anything wrong. And I find it also interesting that he's interviewing Nancy Mace, the disgrace, as I call her, who cares more about trans issues and plays the victim all the time, and has tweeted about trans issues thousands of times, it seems like, in the last month. And he's asking her a very fair question. If you're a woman By the way, I don't know if Nancy Mace is telling the truth or not, by the way. I would question her on anything because apparently if you shake her hand, you broke her arm. I don't know what you make of that story.
Because she's a victim of rape. I mean, I'll believe her, but what you're about to say is the more important point, that, you know, you're a victim. I mean, I think you're going to make that point.
Yeah.
That if you're the victim of sexual assault or rape, and then you're supporting someone who's perpetuated sexual assault and or rape, allegedly dozens of times, which should surprise zero people who knew Donald Trump in 2002 would be surprised by that, which is why when I was on The Apprentice in 2004 and had the opportunity to meet him, they hired me to host a benefit. I was just doing stand-up comedy, and I hosted a lot of things. So they hired me, and I was on the show. They filmed it as part of the show. And they said, do you want to meet Donald Trump? He's going to be here soon. And I said, does he want to meet us? And they said, not necessarily, but we can arrange for a meeting. I'm like, I'm good. I just want to do the show, because I knew then in 2004, Brian, that this guy was a rapist. I knew it then. So it's not like it's news. We all know it. And the idea that someone or anybody supports him, just knowing that alone has always been, to me, the most disgusting. Just you can't really keep your name credible if you are an in-the-know person. You know that he's done these horrible things to women, and yet you still support him for, you know, mayor, much less president of the United States. It is disgusting. Any other job, any man who had been accused of these things, and you know the men are doing it. Come on. Yep. I mean, you also, time, and you're rich, also, you admit it, and you say, I can get away with it when I'm famous. This man can be anywhere near any type of organization, public or private, period, end of story.
Yeah, I agree. Also important to note that Donald Trump's own ex-wife, who passed away a few years ago, once accused Donald Trump of rape in a deposition. And then Donald Trump paid her off to keep her quiet. Very similar to a Pete Hegseth. Very similar to Bill O'Reilly and Fox News. It's very interesting, isn't it? Let's just pay them off and keep them quiet and throw millions of dollars at people. It really is.
Roger Ailes created Donald Trump in a way, and he created O'Reilly, and he created and gave sanctuary and protection to predator men to come work for me, because I'm a disgusting man who has women come into my office and twirl, do a spin, so I can see them before I hire them. That's Roger Ailes. He was a disgusting animal pig of a man, and he created that atmosphere at Fox News. And we know that obviously there's plenty of people who can create those atmospheres at small businesses and large corporations. But let's be clear, it's almost seemingly like the cost of doing business, the cover charge to get a job in the Trump White House. It's like, hey, have you assaulted any women in the past? No? Yeah. Well, then we're not hiring. Yes? Oh, here's a cabinet job.
It's crazy. It's almost like a prerequisite at Fox News that you have to be accused of sexually assaulting somebody to get a gig over there. It's crazy. Pete, I love what you do, man. I really do. Love your podcast. If you want to share that information out so people can follow you, watch your podcast, which I still have to appear on, by the way. I haven't been on your show yet, so we got to do that.
Any day this week you want.
Cool. Let's do it. I don't know that information, how people can find you.
I'm trying to learn to be a big YouTube star like you. So because of you, I'm inspired. YouTube.com/standupwithpete. And it's a podcast every day, wherever you get your podcast, Stand Up with Pete Dominick. We've got an amazing community of people, and we hang out at 8 p.m. East every Monday and Thursday. It's probably the best thing to kind of promote and market in my way, because I love this community of people. We get like tons of people, over 50, 60, 70 people on a Zoom. And I do, comedy, and we bust each other's chops, and we have this great community that I welcome anybody who's viewing this to come check us out. And let's have you on this week. Any day that works for you works for me. I love it.
Pete, love it, man. You're one of the best in the business, super talented, and I always appreciate it when you take the time. Look forward to doing your show, and have a great rest of your day, my friend. And thanks, appreciate the time. Thanks, Pete. Good to see you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Pete. That's Pete Dominick, everybody. Love Pete. He's the best. Honest,